Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously transformative period in history, the early Muslim invasions in India, spanning right from 712 to 1206 AD. We're going to take a journey that starts with the very geographical naming of the subcontinent and ends with these massive, sweeping structural and socioeconomic shifts that completely reshaped the region. There is a ton of incredible history to cover today, from brilliant strategic defenses to some incredibly paradoxical economic policies. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our agenda for today. First, origins, faith, and geography. Second, Qasim, the first Arab success. Third, Ghaznavi, raids and realpolitik. Fourth, Ghori, the empire builder. And finally, number 5, the socio-economic revolution. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Origins, Faith, and Geography. Now, before we even get to the invasions themselves, we have to ask kind of a foundational question. How did Bharat, Hindustan, and India actually get their names? I mean, these aren't just labels, right? They're literal artifacts of ancient trade routes and geography. You see, in ancient times, rivers were basically the biggest markers of identity. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what I mean. If we look at the indigenous roots, the name Bharat comes straight from the Rig Veda's mention of the Bharata tribe. And in mythological traditions, it traces all the way back to King Dushyant's son, or Rishabdev's eldest son. But contrast this with the foreign roots. When ancient Iranian and Persian traders came down from the northwest, they hit this massive river, the Sindhu. Now, because the Persian language pronounced the S sound as H, Sindhu became Hindu, and the land beyond it, well, that became Hindustan. It's the exact same story with the Greeks. They called that same river the Indus, which birthed the name India. So originally, Hindu was just a geographical and cultural identity, not a religious one at all. Just to ground us in the timeline we're dealing with today, let's look at a few key milestones. We start in 570 AD with the birth of Prophet Muhammad in Mecca, marking the dawn of Islam. Fast forward a bit to 712 AD, and we see the first successful Arab incursion by Qasim. Then, by 1025 AD, we start seeing these massive raids deep into the subcontinent, like the famous attack on Somnath. And finally, by 1192 AD, a permanent empire is secured at the Second Battle of Tarin. Moving right along to Section 2, Qasim, the first Arab success. So the year 712 AD is a major turning point. The governor of Iraq, al-Hajjaj, sent a young commander named Muhammad bin Qasim into the region. And after a really fierce struggle, Qasim conquered Sind, defeating the local ruler, King Dahir. Now, what you should take away from this, especially if you're taking notes, is that our primary, absolute, most authentic historical source for this specific military campaign is an Arabic text known as the Chachnama. This moment marked the Arabs establishing a foothold, but honestly, their expansion kind of stalled right there. That brings us to Section 3, Ghaznavi, Raids and Realpolitik. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this number right here, 17. The historical landscape shifts dramatically here with the arrival of the Turks, specifically Mahmud Ghaznavi. And this is where we see a massive shift from attempting to build a local administration to executing these huge hit-and-run campaigns. According to historian Sir Henry Elliot, Mahmud Ghaznavi invaded India 17 times between 1000 and 1027 AD. 17 times. His motive wasn't to establish permanent Muslim rule in India. Actually, scratch that, he wasn't interested in ruling there at all. He just wanted immense wealth to fund and expand his Central Asian empire. And back then, the biggest repositories of wealth in India were the major temples. His most devastating raid, for sure, was in 1025 to 1026 AD against the Somnath Temple in Gujarat. But you know, history is rarely one-dimensional. On one hand, you've got Ghaznavi leading these violently destructive military campaigns just to extract wealth. But on the exact same hand, he's practicing pure, calculated economic pragmatism. Get this. In the areas he partially controlled, he actually minted silver coins featuring Arabic on one side and Sanskrit on the other. Why would he do that? Purely to maintain the trust of the local merchants. Economic transactions had to keep flowing, so engraving Sanskrit was a brilliant diplomatic strategy to just keep local trade running smoothly. Let's move to the next point and see how this builds. Because Ghaznavi used all that extracted wealth to patronize a seriously brilliant intellectual court. If you're a student trying to memorize the major scholars he funded, just use this super helpful mnemonic trick. BOOT. B for Bayhaqi, O for Uzari, A for al-Biruni, U for Utbi, and T for Tusi. So here are those key figures from that BOAUT list, plus Ferdowsi, the author of the epic Shahnameh. But the absolute standout here is al-Biruni. He wasn't just some court flatterer. The guy was a serious astronomer and mathematician. He traveled right alongside Ghaznavi's army, but he operated as a completely neutral observer. I mean, he literally spent years learning Sanskrit, deeply studying the Puranas, and reading original texts by ancient Indian scientists like Brahmagupta. He ended up writing a highly objective, fascinating account of Indian society and science.
All right, now we reach section 4, Ghori, the empire builder.
So after a bit of a political vacuum following Ghaznavi, Shahabuddin Muhammad Ghori enters the picture. But his motive is totally different. He didn't just want loot. He wanted to rule. He was looking to build a permanent empire. However, his path to get there was definitely not easy. In 1178 AD, he tried to enter India straight through Gujarat, but he was met by a fiercely courageous widow, Queen Nika Devi, who was leading the forces on behalf of her minor son. She brilliantly utilized the narrow, tight strategic passes of Mount Abu, where Ghori's cavalry literally couldn't maneuver properly, and she completely defeated him. It was a monumental loss that forced Ghori to entirely rethink his game plan and pivot his entry routes up toward Punjab and Multan instead. And that pivot led to a rapid, explosive succession of crucial battles. Check this out. In 1191 AD, at the First Battle of Tarain, Prithviraj Chauhan defeated Ghori. But Ghori regroups, comes back exactly a year later in 1192 for the Second Battle of Tarain, and this time he wins. That victory permanently secured his imperial foothold. He then followed that up just a couple of years later in 1194 by defeating Jayachand at the Battle of Chandawar near the Yamuna River. So the absolutely crucial point here is how Ghori managed his newly conquered empire once he had it. And notice the striking parallel to Ghaznavi here. While Ghori was aggressively expanding into the Gange-Yamuna Doab region, he also practiced extreme economic realism. You see, the existing economy ran on coins featuring goddess Lakshmi or Nandi. So, to prevent a total economic crash in his brand new territories, Ghori minted coins that kept the image of goddess Lakshmi on one side but added the Arabic kalima on the other. It was a masterclass in currency continuity.
Let's step into our final section, Section 5, the Socio-Economic Revolution.
Once Ghori firmly established his empire, he actually left the day-to-day administration to his trusted commanders, guys like Qutbuddin Aibak. And central to making this whole thing work was the implementation of the Ikta system. Instead of paying military commanders in cash, the state granted them the right to collect land revenue from specific territories, which were known as Iktas. This system fundamentally altered the administrative and economic landscape of India because it rooted these new foreign rulers deeply, deeply into the local agrarian economy. But as we know, this transition of power carried some incredibly harsh realities. Taking full advantage of this new administrative system, one of Ghori's commanders, Bakhtiar Khilji, launched these massive eastward campaigns. And historical sources note that these campaigns resulted in the tragic, devastating destruction of the ancient, world-renowned universities of Nalanda and Vikramashila. Directly following that destruction, Khilji managed a completely bloodless capture of Bengal when the local ruler basically fled without putting up a fight. To really summarize the sheer scale of the change during this era, the noted historian Professor Habib coined a famous phrase. He said, "The Turkish conquest resulted in an urban and rural revolution." What he meant by that was the arrival of the Turks completely broke down the old Rajput feudal structure. They introduced entirely new tax collection methods, which was the rural revolution, and they established new military garrisons. Over time, merchants, artisans, and laborers started settling around these garrisons, which gave rise to brand new urban centers. And that was the urban revolution. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've seen raids driven purely by a thirst for wealth, brilliant strategic mountain defenses, the tragic destruction of ancient knowledge centers, and at the exact same time, the creation of highly pragmatic bilingual currencies and entirely new urban landscapes. It really begs the question, how does historical destruction paradoxically lay the groundwork for entirely new economic structures? History is almost never simple. It's this incredibly complex web of destruction and creation. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.